Mic test real fast. I'm coming in. Leah, how are you sounding?
You tell me, am I sounding all right?
You could get a little closer.
Ooh, really? Okay. I was good a moment ago, right?
Now you're okay again. Yeah.
Noah, you sound good.
Okay.
And Ed.
Kevin,
And
you're a
this is
little
Ed.
you're a little soft.
Okay, I'll get closer.
Sounds good.
And
My
this is
boy.
Ed. Yeah,
Cool.
great.
All right, and off we go. Welcome to No Proscenium's Review Crew. This is episode number 33. I'll be your host today. My name is Kevin Gossett. I am the LA Reviews editor for No Proscenium. On today's show, we have
Edward Mylechreest, New York City correspondent.
Leah Davis, New York. I'm taking over for you. New England correspondent and immersive addict.
And Noah Nelson, publisher and host of the No Pro podcast.
So before we get into today's show, I want to do a quick reminder that we started a No Pro Book Club. So that kicks off with Snow Crash, which by Neil Stephenson, which is Metaverse has been in the news. So we wanted to explore its origins. It's actually the 30th anniversary of that book, as it turns out. So I think it'll be interesting.
Shut up.
So we'll really be able to see like what people thought the internet might be like 30 years ago and how accurate.
It's exactly how it is right now.
Maybe the metaverse is not the way it should be, but who knows.
Senseless shopping malls where you can buy stuff that you could just walk outside. That's the metaverse. It's accurate.
So we'll be reading that by March 15th, and that night we'll have a discussion in the No Pro Discord. Stay tuned for a time on that. Most of us will try to be around that day so we can have a big old discussion about Snow Crash. We're going to kick today's show off with a remote immersive experience called En Route. Noah and I both did this last Friday. I actually didn't realize Noah was going to be in the audience that night, and I stumbled into him in the show.
I didn't know you were going to be there either, so that was great.
It was a fun little encounter. So it is a show where audience members are on a spaceship. You're traveling to a new planet. You've been awoken from cryosleep mysteriously, and you need to figure out what's going on. You move a character around a virtual ship, kind of think Among Us, in actually a couple of different ways. It's kind of you walk around that way. And there is some voting components. And it's on a custom built platform that uses proximity audio and video to connect you with the other participants and actors. So you can kind of see them as you get close and hear what they're talking about and what's going on. So Noah, can you actually get a little bit more into how the show kind of functioned on the standard stuff?
Yeah, so this one's interesting because it is a relatively large scale. I mean, I think we probably interacted with about 15 people on and off when it came to audience members, and there were 3 live actors. But I think there were even more people who weren't turning their video on. There were a lot of characters running around. I felt like there was maybe 30 people in the show.
Yeah, I think I would have guessed 30 to 40.
Yeah. So this is a large scale experience. It has a pretty solid act structure. It starts off with about a 6-minute video that kind of sets the stakes. That's really well done. It's well paced. When I saw that it was 6 minutes, I was like, yikes. But it didn't.
I groaned at that too, and then I think encountered the same thing where it wasn't as bad as I thought it was gonna be.
Yeah, no, I was absolutely shocked. They got just enough exposition, did a good job of setting out what the stakes of the game as we were going to play it were, and then proceeded to go through a series of phases where basically acts or rounds. You had time to explore, you had time to talk to one of the 3 actors or all 3 of the actors if you wanted to do that. You could click around the space that would give you some information that might be pertinent to the situation. Other things felt like it was just lore and flavor text. And then there was every X number of minutes, there would be a vote on a question. Sometimes you'd get a good, nice warning in terms of the countdown would begin and one of the actors would pop up on the all channel and say, hey, this is what's going to happen next. Figure out what you want to do. And you'd have conversations with people around you. Serendipitously, I was so glad to find you. And then there's one gal we didn't know also just started talking to us. So suddenly we were forming a little group spontaneously, but the seed of it was the connection you and I had. Mm-hmm. And that just lather, rinse, repeat. each time a new round started, new wrinkles were given, you got new information. And then by the end of it, there was sort of a final multiple choice possibility that led to one of a few different outcomes. I'm trying to stay a little spoiler light here, and that was the nut of it. Really solid in terms of its fundamentals. Good, solid acting. Like it's like in the Zoom era, there's a certain type of performance that you get, and this was right up that alley. The kind of joy of it was because it was a proximity chat thing. You kind of like eavesdrop a little. That's the fun part about this stuff. By having these proximity video audio chats, you can do the whole eavesdropping on people in a space routine that I think is one of the great advantages for immersive design. And yeah, like not necessarily from a narrative standpoint super deep, but fairly solid. Kevin, did this feel more like an escape room or a narrative piece to you?
So I've been kind of trying to think about that. I don't know where I land. I guess it a little more escape roomy, and then I was thinking even more about it. I was like, this almost actually feels like Arcane on a virtual platform, where it's kind of like some fetch questy stuff. There's some immersive stuff. There's some kind of like you're interacting with the other players in the space, and it felt like a sort of version of that almost. And I was wondering kind of if that made sense to you, or that kind of like picked up on some of those same vibes.
Yeah, I mean, there's something really. You're right. It feels like the way Arcane sort of felt like a large scale one shot LARP. And for those who don't know, we're talking about Arcane. It was the secret cinema paid activation for League of Legends Arcane that was here in Los Angeles a couple of months ago, and was like the highlight of a lot of our years.
Yeah.
That formula is definitely in here. And I think that also made, I thought they did a really good job of onboarding us into what the situation was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
But I got to say, like, and I think there was a lot of conversation afterwards, like the stakes weren't so contrasted that, like, I understand the idea of like wanting to like make the choices be ambiguous enough that you're not really sure what the right thing to do is. But I sort of feel like by the end of it, it was pretty clear what the right thing to do was. Like all signs pointed to, well, this is what the good ending is. And I was a little disappointed in that, because there's something to be said for raising the stakes on the different options in a multiple choice narrative test, and then letting the audience actually argue it out. And I wish it had a little more teeth that way.
Yeah, and I think the three characters that you mostly interact with throughout the show do a kind of good job of setting their intentions, but it also it's pretty clear that they're all flawed characters. And then there's kind of some other information you learn about another character who may or may not be present that I think is a little bit more unambiguous about their intention. So it kind of, I think that's probably what we're all picking up on. I think the audience did too, is kind of drifted more towards that other option, without kind of, because it was like, oh, like you're saying, it's like, oh, that one's the clear, like, is that one the better option? It seems like, because none of these options seem great. Like there's all a clear downside here to something.
So one of the reasons why I posed that question about escape room or narrative piece was because I was observing what some of the other audience members were doing. And there was even at the end, like there was like one guy who like seemed to like zero in on the idea that it was like an escape room, and seemed to like not get that we had like made a selection that was a valid selection, and seemed to be confused. And did you have any interactions with like people who weren't me that made you had a sense that like some of the audience members might be lost, or were people kind of really grokking what was going on?
I think it was just that one guy, because I actually felt like we started off with the one woman who we like started interacting with, and then found a few other people, and it seemed like they all really understood it. I think Bruce, I think he's kind of, I recognize that name from some of the immersive stuff, and he was in there, and I think there's some other kind of people I kind of recognize. So it's like a lot of people seem bought into the concept and understood kind of what we were doing, but there was a couple people that seemed like maybe they didn't, like the show had ended and they're still asking like, can we make this choice? I was like, what do you think?
Could we do this thing? Like, what happens now? And it's like, well, yeah, that was a funny thing. Like, some people were like, oh, like, I'm not sure what happens. Like, they just said X, like we
The
were
show's
just
over, man.
told, we were just told what was going to happen. But I think that was also a thing, though. Like, there were moments even at the end where we're told something was going to happen, but we were also kind of told something else. And so it was like, it was a little
actually, that's,
ambiguous.
to be fair to that guy, it seemed like they left a thread to go like follow up on, and then the show just kind of ended. And it was a little weird that we never really came back to that.
But I think in terms of the fundamental structures of what they did, because they've definitely taken on a lot in terms of what it is they're doing, because there's not only the narrative structure, but they have custom built this platform, which is a little bit wild because there are some platforms that do similar things to this platform, almost to a point where like I sat there going like, oh, maybe other than for aesthetic reasons, why isn't this in Gather? Because Gather does a lot of this stuff. But the funny thing being that there's certain aesthetic things that are doing that are really worthwhile for it not being in Gather. Like, this is a little bit more like a 2.5D video game look than Gather's pixel art look, right? And so if that's what you're kind of going for, but in terms of and in terms of like the interaction design, pretty solid. But the narrative design, the stakes, I just wanted a little more. I wanted to be a little more contrasted and also heightened, and maybe these are some of that stuff is in the lore and it's just kind of unclear. There were a couple of times when it felt like the actors were lore dumping on us, but getting the details a little off. And that can kind of throw things. And so I almost wish that like there was a whole like subplot that was sort of soap opera-ish that didn't really seem to have an impact on what we were doing. And I kind of just wonder why that's there, because then people just start red herringing and get lost in what the story is. Kind of like when people listen to my voice and get lost.
and kind of more to your point too, is I think he may have gotten something wrong, and then it seemed like that character was untrustworthy now too, which may have affected some of the kind of situations that people were like aiming for later. And I think that was kind of actually a running thing, not that people were kind of maybe mistakenly getting the information wrong, but that they were clearly blocking, like, until the next vote, like they won't tell you anything about this, and then they'll spill about it. But it's like you can kind of cotton on to some of these things that are maybe happening, but they won't, even if you figure it out based on what's in the game and the section you're in, they won't necessarily let you act on it until it's like been like a big reveal. So it felt a little weird to have some of that kind of blockading in there.
Yeah. That I think is the disadvantage to having that kind of act structure if you're going to have the ability for folks to kind of jump ahead or improv around it. That being said, did you have fun?
Yeah, I did. Like, it seems like we're maybe a little critical of it, but it was $20. It was like an hour, 15 hour and a half. And I had fun through the whole thing. Like, I've always kind of been a little like hesitant about some of these remote shows. And this one did feel like it captured some of that immersive flavor, because you could go talk to people in the audience. You could talk to the actors. You could kind of explore the set, so to speak, and get some of that feel. And it was like, oh, this is fun. Like, and the platform works shockingly well for something they built just for this too.
I know. Yeah. And to answer my own question, I too had fun. I would love to see this platform developed. I'd love to see scenarios tweaked on it. Like, I mean, God knows how much goes into developing the assets for this. Like, I'm hoping maybe that they're building in Unity or something where they can just like buy asset packs and like arrange things, and that's still like a significant amount of time. But I think there's something really here to this idea of online one-shot blockbuster LARPs. I think there's a thing to it.
And I'd be interested to see
totally
more
keep making those.
Yeah, what this crew does in the future thing, kind of continue this thing, because it was fun.
Do they think of this as a LARP, or is it being presented as a narrative or a play or something else?
Yeah, I think they put the terms a little bit more in like the immersive game category. Kevin,
So
call up
they
everything immersive and tell us how they pitch this.
so they described it as an immersive space adventure online, and I think they
Yeah.
kind of stick with that immersive theater type thing. That's actually that's all that's on their main site. If you go to the ticketing site,
Yeah, I would say like they might. I mean, look, there's all kind. So we do not spend any time building out characters. Like we don't have character, and so thus it does want to kind of like stepping away from LARP that way and into kind of the more immersive theatery sense. Like we have a role, but it's a very simple role that's prescribed, and thus it's easier to jump in. You don't have to build like a whole identity for yourself. And indeed, that would probably like throw things off and confuse everybody. But again, kind of like with, I think they could even lean a little bit towards that secret cinema version of it, where, and particularly because one of the questions is, you know, one option is jettisoning a quarter of the crew who's in stasis, but you quickly find out that you won't be jettisoned if you make that choice, and it kind of doesn't matter. Like there's no factions to it, and I think that's actually a mistake, because if we had factions and it was like, okay, yeah, we're going to jettison a quarter of the crew, that's one option, and then we get to vote on which quarter, and a quarter of the people here are going to get jettisoned and may not survive, right? Like that kind of stake building.
Are you trying to like? Would you like something like Resistance or Avalon, like that sort of like werewolf type social deduction?
Yeah, there's a social deduction. Like it's even pitched as being like, mafia and werewolf is like part of the deal, but that didn't entirely come up. And I think that they could lean more in that social deduction. Like there's a little bit of it, but you're mostly doing that with the actors, and you
because it
yourself
doesn't.
don't have a secret. Yeah.
It's almost like the crew like the audience becomes one faction, and the three other characters are their own separate factions. Is how it ended up splitting out. I know that's like kind of intentional in the design, or it's just because all of the characters seem untrustworthy to some degree, and everyone kind of banded together that way.
Yeah.
But I think I think they try and align you in the intro video to kind of like one character, and it doesn't work that well. I think they immediately come off as like, you're lying to me. I'm gonna go do something else. Like,
yeah, that totally is true. And so again, like it's fun. It's $20. It's totally worth it. I think that they can iterate on this. I think there's a lot of ideas in there, and they could pare back. I think there's things they could lean more into and make something that was really sharp and really dynamic, and maybe even something that could, take less control on their part, if you will, like less interference and something more that they can like toss to the audience to be more like a werewolf in a mafia situation. Or that would be one permutation of this kind of.
yeah, and I think the voting would almost allow that too. Like they can play with that mechanic. And for a first round out, it's like there's a lot of ideas here. I think they can work with and craft into something really cool as they like iterate on this concept and probably get more players in actually playing the game and seeing what they do.
Yeah,
I mean, it sounds great. It sounds very interesting, and it's still running for another couple of weeks. Is that the?
That's a really good question. I know they had a pretty short run. I think they did a slight extension, but I don't think they're going to do a big extension.
So it runs through the end of February.
Okay.
We'll link it in the show notes, but there's a show actually tonight if you'd like to spend Valentine's Day on a
no one's going to hear this for a few more days. So
damn it.
Well, I'm hearing it. Maybe I want to spend Valentine's Day on a ship.
There we go.
One sale. We got one sale down.
On Friday, Saturday, Sunday of that's February 18th, 19th, and 20th, and then the 26th and 27th. I'll have a few shows. So it's definitely running. It seems like it can take a lot of people. I don't know if they can really sell out, but it's $20. I had a lot of fun. I think Noah, you had fun too.
Yeah.
And I'd recommend it. Are you actually going to be writing about it on the site at all?
Yeah, I'll put I'm going to do a little capsule review. Not a big one, but the cap will go out in the review roundup this week. Obviously positive with some of the notes. So people will have seen that by the time they hear that. So this will be kind of the more in-depth version of it.
Right.
Maybe I'll do a tease in the rundown.
There we go. So if you've somehow not read the rundown, please go read that for more Noah's or less of Noah's thoughts.
Because what you really want to do after I've rambled at you is go read the summary Cliff Notes version so that you can tune out.
Hey,
for those of you tuned out,
we're plugging the site. We're getting the synergies here. So now we are going to jump to an in-person experience. Back after being closed for almost 2 years is Punch Drunk's Sleep No More. Yay. In case you're unfamiliar, this is a show based on Macbeth, draws heavily from Hitchcock. It is a sandbox-style immersive show, covers 5 floors in a Chelsea warehouse, and it is a pillar of modern immersive theater. We've probably talked about it a lot on here. I assume it comes up a lot on the No Proscenium podcast. It comes up probably everywhere we talk about immersive because it is hugely influential in the space, and it is now back. So Ed, you went and as a reviewer to the show, and Leah, you actually went as a civilian. So Ed, my first question to you is, how did it feel to be back, and how is it different?
I mean, it is all the words that you've given it already and more. Like, it really is such a staple part of the immersive scene, particularly here in New York. But it's been so influential for so many creators. And to be back in the hotel, because it is the McKittrick Hotel, which you're invited to explore. It really is still. It has all the magic, all the mystique that it's always had. I mean, this show is a show which opened and was meant to. It was going to close after a few months, and then extended, and we're now here 10 years later. The show is fantastic. From the sound design, the set design, the incredible performers. It really is in so many ways the biggest influence, I think, on the immersive scene here in New York, and for many outside of here. It's a special show. It's unique. It's not for everybody's taste, and there are a lot of shows who have been influenced and have taken what they like, and those who have seen and perhaps gone in different ways. But as far as a sandbox where you really are invited to go and play and explore this amazing space with incredible performers who never speak. The entire show is dance and movement based. It's a Hitchcock dream. It's from the 1940s, a soundtrack of amazing film scores. It's so hard to explain, but one which really has to be experienced to be believed. And yeah, it's back. It's almost too big to fail, I think is the term. But it's so great that genuinely this show is actually able to come back after such a hiatus. Leah, what did you think about it?
I felt like it was so good to be home. Now, I remember the early days before the club car and Gala Green or any of that existed, and I remember walking into a show that it just felt like there was electricity in the air every time you walked into those 2 big wooden doors. You never knew what was going to happen, and I've loved Sleep No More from the beginning. I would never, ever suggest that it was getting stale, ever. The performances are always top-notch. But at some point over the last 4 years or so before the pandemic, I'd started noticing a few changes that made sense for a show that was going on for a decade plus. But the candies and paisley sweets were being changed out from these sort of old-time gumdrops and everything to wrapped butterscotches, little changes like that. And it was interesting as somebody who loved the show to watch it change over time in a way that felt much more operationalized. But my point with all of this is coming back to this refreshed show felt like somebody had done a hard reset. And it just brought all of the magic back for me. And it was different and it was interesting. So it felt good. It felt good.
I think that's a great way to summarize it. How many times have you been, Leah? What's your number at this point?
I'm not cool enough to count, but I've also gone too many times that I don't know.
Exactly.
Let's say a dozen, 20 something.
Right, exactly. I'm in the same place. I'm an awkward teen, somewhere where it's like
Yes.
probably too many times where I should be ashamed, but not enough where I should be proud of it. The great thing for me, so the show actually officially opens tonight, Valentine's. I went last night with Ali Marotta, another New York City correspondent. She's only been once, and that was many
Ooh.
years ago. So the two of us are going to be writing capsules and comparing our views on the show as someone who is more experienced and someone who is not, about how the show presented itself. And I think that's going to be a really interesting thing to read. So make sure you check out our capsule on that when you get a chance to.
And so, yeah, I wanted to go back to something. You mentioned Paisley Sweets specifically, and how they'd started wrapping the candies in the last few years. How has that specific sequence changed with the COVID protocols? And I know I read an interview or an article about Sleep No More where they talked about they had changed the mask from its kind of age old style to accommodate more COVID protocols. And what else is kind of different about the show in terms of that?
So when I went down for a matinee and then for an evening show, and I was driving down from New England, and the whole time I was worried a little bit that I'd be losing something, some of the freedom that comes that I'm used to in the audience at Sleep No More. But the stuff they did for safety, it was just so clever. Like you say, the masks, which usually have a bit of a long duck bill in front, have been replaced by something a little more Venetian. So it covers the nose but not the mouth, which makes room for a KN95 mask that they provide for you. The effect, because they won't let you wear your own mask in, you have to wear a mask that they provide, is almost identical to the masks we're used to seeing. So you get the duck bill, but in a different direction. The black masks, who are the stewards within the show, the people who stop you from going into doors you're not supposed to go into and such, have the same situation. They've got their black KN95 and their black mask going on. And overall, it just felt it felt like I was aware that they'd made a number of changes, but it didn't feel like the external world was coming into the show, if that makes sense.
Right. And I mean,
Yeah.
this was a show which I think once COVID really hit, this was a show I think so many of us feared that that's it, like it's never coming back.
Mm-hmm.
And the team have obviously taken time and discussed with people how to make it work. They have on-site testing or around-the-corner testing for people who haven't. You have to present vaccine. You have to present all of the tests, all that sort of stuff within 48 hours.
So
and like you say,
both, right? Like not just
I was
one,
surprised by that. Yeah.
but
both.
it's
Both.
vaccinated and a negative test. Like that's a high standard
It
compared
really
to
is.
say like the Super Bowl or whatever freaking was happening.
Right, which is its whole other interesting problem. The KN95s, like you say, Leah, like they're provided for us. It's very interesting, and I think for anybody who's not seen the show, like we're saying, they did have masks before. They had masks before it was cool to have masks. But now, for me, it's interesting you say that because we're very protected in that we have this. For me, one of the beautiful things in the past was the first mask, which just covered the top of the face, really. You still had this sense of anonymity, but you could see other audience members' facial reactions to an extent. You could see the open mouths, you could see the smiles, you could see the "I'm totally freaked out." Whereas here, when that was taken away, for me, I felt like we were even more anonymous, even more like the spectral figures, and it almost the effect of the KN95 and the mask almost made it look even more like a skull than the duckbill. So for me, I'm really appreciative of it. I would say, if I'm being picky about my personal experience, it took away something that I was now, when I looked around to see, I wasn't seeing anonymous people. I was just seeing anonymity completely, if that makes sense. But it's a smartly produced show, and they've done a really good job of making sure that everybody is covered, everybody is protected. I do still feel for the performers. Obviously, I'm sure they are doing hundreds of tests and all that sort of stuff every week. It is still Sleep No More. And so if you've ever been, you know that it is a crowded space and people are so in love with the show and in love with the performers and everything that's going on. People are chasing up and down stairs, which is harder in a KN95, by the way. But there's still the crowding around, and it's definitely an interesting position where they're in, because it's all about small details. So there's no big acting. It's all someone's writing a love note, or it's a glance, and people are all around the performers. So it's something which I think they've done the best they possibly can as far as COVID protocols and things. I still felt at moments I was surprised how many people there were, and having not been in a situation where I've been surrounded by so many people, there were a couple of moments where I just found myself having to just to like check out for a moment, just like move back and not investigate as I might have done in the past. But like I say, I think the protocols that they've done are industry leading as far as protection for audience and for the crew involved, which it deserves a lot of praise for that.
Now, how many
I stepped away for a
people,
quick second earlier, but I
ooh,
just want to check on something. I don't know if you guys have mentioned it yet or not. Are the performers masked?
no.
Right. Which also
No,
may
they're
make sense
not.
why they're going for like the full negative test as well as vaccination, because if the performers have to
Mhm.
run around, you want to do everything you can to keep them protected, since they're the ones
Now,
getting exposed daily.
to, in addition to all of that, I don't know about you, Ed, but there were certainly fewer people in the audience when I attended. Uh, and the black masks were making a lot more space for the physical performances. So in the past, you could go and you could really put yourself in um, what is it, the personal bubble of these
Harm's
characters as
way.
they're dancing in harm's way, right?
Like to get kicked in the head sometimes.
well,
Lean in while they're doing spins and kicking,
well,
like
you
try
could,
and
and it
stop
was
someone in a fight scene, just the normal stuff that happens at Sleep No More.
but listen, that's exactly right. That's how it had evolved. So, 4 years ago, you'd go and people were very aggressive about getting into the performer spaces. And I've got to assume this is a COVID protocol, but the black masks were creating so much space in some of these performances that we were all 15 feet away. Most people were. And it was incredible to watch these dances that I'm used to seeing just bits and pieces of on a larger scale. And it felt, to me at least, it felt much more intimate.
I
Because we
That
noticed that
contradiction's
the oh
interesting, right? That it lets you like you're almost further away and like at more of a remove, but it made it more intimate.
well, it did, and it felt to me like all of so I recognized a few faces in the audience as we were going into the show, a few hardcore kids that I'm acquainted with of people who've been just dozens and dozens of times. So we had a bunch of old school Sleep No More people and fans, and we had a few new people in our audience that evening. And it just felt like everyone had been put on an even playing field again. So
Mm.
nobody was
Mm.
trying to put themselves in the way of a one-on-one, and nobody was rushing around trying to see X, Y, or Z. Instead, we were all there just experiencing it with a beginner's mindset that was just so beautiful.
And in fact, just to jump on that, the whole concept of the one-on-one has changed within the show. For those who aren't experienced with the show, this is really where the term one-on-one has come from, where there's secret moments and a select audience member might be selected for a one-on-one performance with an actor. And certainly for me in the show I was at, they no longer exist in the same format that they did. There were a couple of moments where I recognized that performers were performing the same one-on-one interactions, but this time in a general audience space. They still had a moment of locked eye interaction with a certain audience member, but it was done in a space altogether. The masks stay on 100% the whole night, and so that was really interesting to see. It did make me question, perhaps, like, why is it that suddenly this audience member can see this person, where that doesn't happen any other time? So there's a little question of that, but it was still beautiful. For me, I was really fortunate in that right at the end of the show, I was accompanied down to the final reveal. For those who know what happens at the end, I was next to one of the performers, and the performer had some interaction with me, which was as simple as a handhold and an arm around my shoulder. And because there had been no physical interaction at all for the show, and because that had gone, it moved me in a way I was so surprised by, and it was very, very subtle. But it was very interesting that having had such a famous part of the interaction, the one-on-one, taken away, there's new expressions of it within the show. which I think is really interesting to see how they've adapted that.
I think it speaks to what Leah was talking about earlier. How it's kind of they've taken some creativities to kind of work around COVID and the restrictions that are present there, and they've found new ways to make the show kind of interesting and feel alive, even if you've been a lot of times, whether that's kind of in the teens or in the 20s or more. So that's great to hear.
And one of the things that they've finally done, which I applaud them for wholeheartedly, is they have taken away your phones. In the same way as Secret Cinema have for a couple of years now. When you arrive, your phone, they ask you to bring out your phone and you put it in a pouch. You keep the pouch with you at all times, but the pouch is locked. So you cannot get it out unless you go back to the bar and they'll unlock it for you. Now, does this cause issues? That's a question. But as far as for me as an audience member, suddenly there's no one on their phone when they're bored. There's no one suddenly on Instagram in the middle of this amazing scene. And like, it's always felt so hurtful and disrespectful when there's an amazing story going on all around you. There are performers who are like world-class dancers and movers who are suddenly like less important than a notification. So
Ed, when you say this causes some problems, were there people who were whining about it, or do you mean?
I mean, one or two people, but again, I think this is the difference about the people who are listening to this podcast who have a love and desire for immersive, as opposed to some people who maybe not so. And that's one of the beauties of Sleep No More, is that it has become the gateway for so many people. The fact that there's no dialogue means that it is accessible to all languages.
Yeah. I feel like with
huge audience for it.
The phone pouch thing, that's something that happens at all kinds of events. Like it's not. I mean, there's a whole sub industry of those phone pouches.
You know what though? They haven't quite gotten the mechanics of this one down. It creates a bit of a bottleneck at the top and bottom of the show. So, hot tip: if you're going, just bring a bag and check your phone and coat check. It'll be a lot faster for you.
Absolutely. My question is only, like, I know that people who need phones in ways that are not necessary for Tinder or whatever else, who have emergency things, there are still mechanisms so you can get the phones, I'm sure. But for me, as an audience member, it was a beautiful game changer that suddenly I wasn't going to be spoiled by a shining blue light out of the corner of my eye.
Yeah, I also I have very little sympathy. Like, if you're a doctor on call, or if you've got like someone who's ill or sick that you've got to take care of, or like children, like that's it. Everyone else is like, no, get the fuck off your phones.
Right.
You got a couple hours, just relax and be immersed and feel it.
Like, just, and the same is true. Like, I mean, I feel that way about concerts. Like, there was a concert series here in LA that was, where they would have us check our phones, and I loved it.
Yeah.
Even Arcane did it, and so I went with someone who hadn't been to an immersive thing in a while, and he was like, I didn't realize why they're doing it at first, and it's like, things like by the end, he's like, no one was playing on their phone, like no one was like messing around, and I had to see the light and like kind of come out of it. And I think, especially for people who are probably newer to it, it helps them kind of get into an immersive show where they might normally have that kind of distance and separation, where you don't even have to like now think about that your phone is in your pocket. Like, is it going to ring? Do I need to check it? Like, for some people, it's like become a watch where it's how you check your time. And with that removed from you, it forces you back into the show, I think, in some great ways.
Yeah. I also think we're all kind of tired of it. In the chat, Leah is asking if we can talk about intro/onboarding. And I think the answer is yes. What's up with it?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Have they finally done something with that like all black hallway that like had nothing in it that would give you any sense of what you were walking into? That was
shut your face. Do not disrespect the black hallway. I love that thing.
I think it's a perfect opportunity for them to have some portraits out, so you could at least be able to figure out who's who as you're walking in. But that's just me.
No. They haven't touched that part. But I'm curious, Ed, what was your onboarding like?
So my onboarding, again, I was privileged to be part of the press crew. It also meant that the Friends of Oz is the term for the people who are willing to splash a little bit of extra cash for the show. So I was given a gold rope fabric to wear around my neck the whole time, which felt a little scarlet letter or something, so people could see I was important. But I was given that. But once we got through, it used to be there was an elevator. Well, not an elevator pitch, but an elevator ride, which was really interesting. For us here, it took place in an open space, and one of the performers was there and welcomed us in a very beautiful monologue, which was almost quite meta about welcome back and so glad to be here and new changing times and all that. And we were let in through a different manner. Which what happened for you? What happened for you?
That was more or less what I experienced. I don't know. Like I said, we had a very small audience for my evening, but I was led into the same space, and that speech, that onboarding speech that Ed was talking about there, it takes place in this room, this red room, and I was just immediately transported to Twin Peaks. It was extremely eerie and strange for me in this space that I thought I recognized, and it was just me and maybe one other audience member
Oh, wow.
being spoken to. It was really phenomenal.
So just to be clear, my memory of things were back in the day, you would go to, and for anyone who wants to like zero out, like you consider this a spoiler tag probably for the next like 3 minutes. So skip ahead 3 minutes.
I was actually going to say, let's make it a longer spoiler tag, because I want to get into some of the scenes that we just haven't talked about Sleep No More in a while. It's a fun show to talk about in like
because we've got like another 10 minutes to go. So from here on out, it's going to be pure spoilers to the end of the show.
Everyone dies.
Yeah.
Sorry. Oh, sorry. Was that long enough?
But also we weren't fully the spoilers yet. So way to go, Ed. Okay. So back in the day, you'd get loaded into the bar into Mandalay, and then you'd have there'd be entertainment going on, a chance to get drinks, a chance to get a shot of absinthe. You were waiting around for your number to be called, your card to be called. And then my experience of it was there was a little vestibule near the elevators. You were given the keep your mouth shut, keep your mask on speech. And then most of the time you were put into the elevator and then dropped off at various floors. And then some unlucky people, like myself one time, if they were trying to get enough people through, were just sent into the stairwells and it's like, congratulations, stairs begin now. The other thing about the elevators was certain times of the night, there was a secret floor that one lucky person might get shoved out onto and go have a very intense experience for a little bit of time before being released back into Gen Pop. So you mentioned this red room, Black Lodge, fantastic, love the vibes. But how much of that Mandalay to getting into this space, and is the elevator completely gone / just reserved for those people who need the elevator now? Nope. That's kind of a mobility issue too.
Everything you described is still there.
Okay.
And the speech and the masks, that all happens in the strange vestibule. The red room is added on to the beginning of this entire experience. And this is...
So even before you hit Mandalay?
Yes. This is pre-Mandalay. Wow. And it's a space that I think of as the transition point from real world into the show. And it really sets the scene. It sets the tone. And the difference between what it is now and what it used to be is you really don't spend a lot of time hanging out in Mandalay now. You might walk through, but they pretty much rush you straight through.
They are very keen to keep Mandalay clear, particularly at the beginning. Again, it might have been. It's all about timing, where you are on the line, right? It may have just been the way I was. We were barely there for a moment, and at the end of the night, traditionally, it's been a space where there's performances and people hang out for an hour or two. Certainly last night, they were very keen for us to have a drink and be on our way. Whether that's a COVID protocol or whether that was just it's the last night of previews protocol, I don't know. But I was aware of that. And again, that was the only time anybody didn't have a mask on, was when they were in the bar. For me, the elevator didn't exist. So I'm not sure, again, was it just my bad luck? I really missed the elevator. I think there's something beautiful about the fact that element of danger is implemented straight away, where someone gets off the elevator and not everybody else
gets
does.
off. You get shoved off.
You get shoved off, right? Like that moment tells you like this show is dangerous in a beautiful, sexy way, right?
And let's quotes around danger, right? It's not actually dangerous, but you're going to get surprised. You don't know what happens.
Yes,
because it creates such an element of like uncertainty of like, where'd my friend go? Where am I going?
Yeah.
Whereas for us last night, it was down the stairs you go, which was fine. It was fine. But again, I don't know whether that was my timing or a preview
Leah, did you
or
have
a
an
COVID.
elevator?
I did. I had an elevator. It was the same experience
Great.
for me that I've
Cool.
experienced many times before. I have a complaint though. I always get let off in the same space, and it's always
Oh.
into a little dark hallway, and I'm just
Oh.
like praying for that sixth floor someday.
I mean, if nothing else, you could just be like, "Oh, anything but the third, please," and then just be like, "Oh, but you can't talk, right?" That's when
Right.
it's
Well,
like
this
I'm
show
just
is
sprint
hell.
down to the
This show is
ballroom.
hell for somebody with zero sense of direction. So I couldn't tell you which floor it is. It's always just the same floor, though.
Yeah. But one of the interesting things was all of the spaces seemed very similar. I wasn't aware that there were huge touch-ups or huge anything. Again, the space is so dark. It's designed that way. It's designed to be such a mysterious place. So I'm sure there has been touch-ups. I'm
easier
sure
on the
they
upkeep.
have done stuff. But exactly, it's if you keep the room dark, it doesn't matter that the floor is all sticky. But
You.
so that was interesting.
Okay. So did anyone go to the rave?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. And
So
totally
that's what I was
the
going to
same
ask
normal.
is,
Yeah. Are all our favorites there?
Well,
Is everything
yes,
happening?
what sequences did you see like this time they were like, oh, that one stood out, or maybe it didn't stand out before? That's just like, it's a favorite, like the rave, or everyone has to hit it because it's the rave.
Which
I would
I
say
want to
walk
point out,
out.
I did not know the rave existed the first time I went, and I didn't get to see it.
Huh.
And so like I made a point of making sure I saw it the second time I saw it. Like my first trip through Sleep No More was a big letdown. And my second trip was substantially better. And all of that had to do with the fact that for my second trip, I decided that my second rotation was going to be following the Bald Witch. Best choice I've ever made in an immersive, straight up.
My best show at Sleep No More was also following Bald Witch. Good luck charm.
Hey,
Huh.
that's
Mine's
the
the
tip,
porter.
everyone.
Mine was the porter. That was my boy. So if you go, I would say check out the McDuffs. I think they do some really beautiful work, and I think that there's an additional dance.
For a second, I thought you said the
that happens to them.
McDucks, and I got really
McDucks.
confused. I was like, the
Wow.
McDucks are in this now?
That's the crossover we need. That's it.
Yeah.
Disney,
Ed
make it
and
happen.
Leah were saving that for the end. That
Quack no more.
the show is vastly changed.
Oh, that's it. If the Star Cruiser doesn't work out, this is what it will be. It will be
just
Done.
Quack
with
no more.
quacks.
Done.
Quack no more.
Oh,
Love it. I wish. Unfortunately, we're in the spoiler territory, so we cannot name this episode "Quack No More." So,
Aw.
Yeah, we can. That makes no sense out of context. We'll be fine. All right, continue about the McDuffs, though, please.
please.
There's not much more I want to say. There's the beautiful dance in the sitting room is still there, but I believe they've added something that at least I'd never seen before. Some prayers and dancing on top of cabinetry.
Yeah, and
I'm sorry, I'm stuck on this Quack No More thing. We need to, here's a class assignment. And we'll do a special reconvening of ourselves at some later date. We must go through the Disney afternoon lineup and cast Sleep No More with
amazing.
out of the performers from the Disney afternoon lineup. So
can we just ask for the fan art now? Like, can people start doing
that's
the
the
drawings
goal is to get to
and
the
send
fan
it to
art,
us?
right? So you can play with DuckTales and Tailspin and Darkwing Duck. And
Chip and Dale,
Rescue Rangers, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And just for completion's sake, we can throw in Gummy Bears. Basically, anything that was referenced in the 2018 DuckTales reboot in terms of characters is fair game to cast in here in Sleep No More. Punch Drunk Disney collab. It's going to happen. Make it happen. All right. Sorry. Continue. So dancing on chairs and whatnot. Yeah.
To get us slightly back on track, I went into the show with very open feelings because I've not seen it for 2 years and so many others. So it was, like you say, a hard reset, but really it was a hard reset on me. So rather than, I think it was sort of like, it became, I'd played the main game, right? And now I was looking for the side quests, right? I'd done all of Red Dead Redemption and now I'm going to go and look after the Jimmy and his dog or whatever, right? And side quest, like I'm trying to find this happen. I'm trying to follow this person. This time around, having been away from the space for 2 years, I allowed myself just to go, you know what? I don't need to quest it. I can just enjoy it, which was a huge revelation and just gave myself freedom to, I'm going to explore this room and oh, something amazing is happening here. I followed one character for like a whole loop, but then there were other loops where I was like, this looks fun, and that was really beautiful. That's a side effect of the pandemic and us being able to come back to the space, is being able to refresh ourselves as audience members, which I think is really beautiful.
What character did you follow? Just out of curiosity.
I followed a nurse, and she was brilliant.
Oh, okay.
The entire night, she was fantastic.
Nice.
I did something that I've never done before at Sleep No More too. I sat myself down in the box overlooking the ballroom, and I stayed there for a whole cycle, mostly listening to the soundtrack.
Oh,
it was amazing.
I've always wanted to be brave enough to do that. Like, I would love just to do that. That's so cool.
This remains the genius of this production, is that there's multiple ways to explore it. There's the sit yourself down, and not only that, but because you get 3 rotations a show, you're encouraged to, right? You can take chances. You can either stick to someone, or you can just A/B every room that you're in. You can sit down somewhere for a long time and get such radically different experiences. And the grand disappointment of the last 10 years of immersive, and granted, it's at a big scale. It's not easy. Like, this is asking a lot on one level, is that no one's tried to like go for that formula. And I think the critical thing about that formula is the loop, and the idea that you're going to see it more than once, and that loop is going to encourage you to explore and to create a density of material. And
it is really hard. It is really hard to know. I would have to say, like, to find a way to make the time loop part of the show without it feeling like, oh, we're just doing what Sleep No More did, I think is very tricky. It's doable. And I mean, there's so much media going on right now, video games and film, which are all about time loops. I think like we're kind of obsessed with this idea. It's definitely a difficult thing to implement, but it has so much potential, like you say, so much richness to it.
And look,
okay, I want to share.
Go for it.
This is a free idea. So I want to see a show that runs forward and then in reverse. Do that twice. So done. It's already something new.
Yeah, I do think that just like it's funny as I watch companies, and look, I haven't done Drowned Man, so I don't know if that thing runs on a loop. I don't know if Burnt City's going to run on a loop. I don't know if like loop is.
I believe they all do.
Yeah, so like there's a bit of like, Punch Drunk does a loop. Like there's something to that, right? But I gotta say, like, it's in some ways it may be like the fundamental feature. The thing that makes this stuff really, really, really sing.
And I think I think we could go on for another 2 hours about Sleep No More pretty easily, but we do need to wrap up. I think the one other thing I think is probably too that no other immersive show is on this scale. It's hard to, nothing's this big, and I think that's part of what makes Sleep No More feel so grand, is because it's a humongous show in terms of the sheer size of the thing, but also the tracks and the cast and all these other pieces, and that's kind of what makes it what it is on some
which
level
have
too.
all for the most part stayed intact. And like you say, I think the fact that they managed to get this giant Titanic of a show back up on its feet after 2 years is huge. And it took more time than some of the other shows because it's so big, but it's there. It has the infrastructure. It still has the audience of clamoring fans who are ready and willing and can't wait to experience the magic. So the fact that it is back, I think, is huge for the New York City theater. It's huge for New York City immersive. I think it's huge for immersive worldwide. So if you haven't seen the show, come on by. Any of us New York people would love to host you and like chat you through it. But Sleep No More is back, and it is great.
And check out the site for more of Ed and Allie's thoughts on the rebooted Sleep No More. And that is it for today's show. So as always, No Proscenium is a labor of love. Everyone on staff who you hear on podcasts and on the site are volunteers. You can help support this work by donating to the No Proscenium Patreon. Just even $2 or $5 a month helps a lot. If you're enjoying Review Crew or the regular No Proscenium podcast, you can also support us by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Signing off for the crew, this is Kevin Gossett, and thank you.